Thanks for coming. This is the Teen Tales program, and my name is Nikki Madigan. I'm the curator here. The theme this year is Canada's 150th, so we're talking about Pemberton history in the context of Canada's 150th birthday. Also, just to note, these presentations are filmed for the community record, and we put them up on our website about a week after each presentation. And just to give you a heads up, next week we have a staff presentation on the gold rush and what was going on in Canada in 1858. And then in August, Johnny Jones is going to take us on a walk through Lil'wat territory. Eric Anderson's up from Squamish. He's going to talk to us about Pemberton in the world news. He's researching Pemberton through historic newspapers. And lastly, on August 22nd, Brenda McLeod will take us through the history of flood control in Pemberton. So for more info, you can check our website. We also have a poster up at the info kiosk. We want to thank our local presenters for coming today, our volunteer bakers, and all of you for joining us today. Today we're exploring the history of the humble potato. And we're excited to have Roxy Kuurne join us, who will give us the story of the seed potato industry today. But we're going to start with a short slideshow about the history of the potato and its importance as a world crop, and how it's also an important crop for Canada. And then we'll walk you through a brief history of the seed potato industry in Pemberton and how it came to be. And then I have a list of questions for Roxy about Pemberton seed potatoes, and I invite you to contribute your thoughts and questions to this discussion. I just want to start by giving you some info about Roxy before we start today's tale. She's from Princeton, BC, and her parents worked full-time doing other things, but they were also part-time ranchers, so she says this was her first experience working on a farm. And in 1976, she came up to Pemberton. She completed a soil survey for the Pemberton Valley through the BC Ministry of Agriculture. She was also the first woman in soil science at UBC. I guess while she was up exploring soil, she'd met Mark Kuurne, and soon they married. And today, Kuurne Farms is a seed potato farm primarily, but they also raise beef, carrots, squash, turnips, and sheep, and they also grow some commercial potatoes. We want to thank Roxy for taking time out of her busy schedule to be with us today, and appreciate the support of the Pemberton Farmers Institute for today's presentation. So we'll start with the short history on the history of the humble potato, just to show you how well loved potatoes are. This is a painting by Renee Ronan. It was done in the 30s, that would have been taken to trade shows and agricultural fairs throughout the area, the lower mainland. And this banner is about 8 feet long, so we don't have it on display anywhere, but we did roll it out one day and take a photo. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. All right, a brief history of the potato. It is the world's 4th largest food crop following rice, wheat, and maize. The Incas in Peru were the first to cultivate potatoes about 8,000 to 5,000 years ago. In 1536, Spanish conquistadors conquered Peru and discovered the flavors of the potato and carried them back to Europe. And then Sir Walter Raleigh introduced potatoes to Ireland in 1589 on the 40,000 acres of land near Cork, and it took nearly 4 decades for the potato to spread to the rest of Europe. Eventually, agriculturalists in Europe found potatoes were easier to grow and cultivate than other staple crops, such as wheat and oats. And most importantly, it became known that potatoes contain most of the vitamins needed for sustenance. On 1 acre, you could feed 10 people. The first potatoes to arrive in North America from Europe were sent to Governor Francis Wyatt of Virginia, and there were 2 large cedar boxes that were filled with different vegetables. Among them were potatoes. The very first potatoes grown in North America were planted in Derry, New Hampshire in the year 1719. Idaho didn't start growing potatoes until 1836. In the 1840s, a major outbreak of potato blight, a plant disease, swept through Europe, wiping out the potato crop in many countries. The Irish working class lived largely on potatoes, and when the Blight reached Ireland, their main staple food disappeared. This famine left many poverty-stricken families with no choice but to struggle to survive or immigrate out of Ireland. Over the course of the famine, almost 1 million people died from starvation or disease. Another 1 million people left Ireland, mostly for Canada and the US. Here's some fun facts about potatoes. Did you know that a family could live on potatoes if required, just like the Irish did? So although all the green parts are poisonous, the tubers provide carbohydrates, protein, and potassium, as well as vitamin C and B6 and some trace nutrients. Only vitamin D is missing, and that can be obtained from sunshine. The renowned Smithsonian Institute claims that potatoes changed the world by preventing the famines that had crippled Europe. During the Alaskan Klondike gold rush, potatoes were practically worth their weight in gold. Potatoes were valued for their vitamin C, and gold at that time was more plentiful than nutritious foods. And we know that's the case here when the gold rush came through this area. Entrepreneuring farmers sold potatoes, cucumbers, and tomatoes for $1 each in 1858 to the gold rushers. You could get a horse for $50 in comparison. A bottle of brandy was $75. In October 1995, the potato was the first vegetable to be grown in space. NASA and the University of Wisconsin created the technology with the goal of feeding astronauts on the long space voyages and eventually feeding future space colonies. So if any of you signed up for the Mars expedition, chances are you're going to be living on potatoes. Just a little bit about Canada and how we love potatoes. By the 1960s, the Canadian Potato Research Centre in Fredericton, New Brunswick, was one of the top 6 potato research institutes in the world. It was established in 1912 as a Dominion experimental station. It began in the 1930s to concentrate on breeding new varieties of disease-resistant potatoes. In the 50s and 60s, the growth of the French fry industry in New Brunswick led to a focus on developing varieties for the industry. Those of you that were with us for the Pemberton Valley 1957 movie remember some Canadian facts that McCain's French fries were invented in 1957. And poutine was first served in Warwick, Quebec, so Canadian potato consumption went way up. Potatoes are still Canada's most important vegetable crop. They're grown commercially in all of its provinces, led by Prince Edward Island. In modern days, potatoes have grown in popularity due to their versatility and ability to be used for many different dishes of food. A little pie chart I found online showing the distribution of potato farms. BC falls under others of 9%. And that's because BC is a mountainous province. There's not as much farmland as some of the other provinces. A brief history of Pemberton seed potatoes. Potatoes first came to Fort Langley, BC in 1827 with the Hudson's Bay Company. Early records indicate that the growing of potatoes was adopted quickly by the Lil'wat Nation, who have lived around Pemberton for thousands of years. The potato is said to have made it to Pemberton before the gold rush miners of the 1860s. The seed potato industry in Pemberton began to gain momentum after the 1922 Fall Fair, with great encouragement from federal government officials who saw the potential in the isolation of the area, the rich river valley soils, and the dry climate. By 1939, local seed potato growers received a total of 18 awards. Each success was the result of farming and exhibiting skills above the average, as well as endless perseverance. Early growers were Decker, Arne, Blakeway, and Cooper, Green, Ronan, Wellington, Kay, and Blakeway. They grew Snowflake, White Rose, Netted Gems, Epicure, Early Rose, and Green Mountain seed potatoes. The Pemberton Cooperative Association was formed in 1941 by local farmers and businessmen with the objective of obtaining supplies more cheaply and to better ship Pemberton products via the railway. Shortly after forming, the cooperative took over the Snowflake potato brand from the Board of Trade and became actively involved in the shipment and marketing of this product. We have an old tag here from the co-op days, and then we have a newer tag from Van Loon's. that's showing a Yukon Gold variety. The first eradication of the PVX and PVS virus from potato varieties was achieved in 1967 by a research team from the Agriculture Canada station in Vancouver, who planted stem cuttings on Clifford Ronan's farm. Back in 2008, we talked to Molly Ronan about this, and she had some great stories about how they came up from the city, and they didn't want long sleeve shirts. They were going to be fine because they had off, and she said they only lasted about 20 minutes, and then she had to give them some of Clifford's old shirts. And as right, Dick Stace Smith, Francis Mellerand, and Ted Cole received a Public Service Merit Award in 1972 in recognition of outstanding research leading to the development of virus-free potatoes. Pemberton had the first virus-free stock in North America and has maintained the industry ever since. So that's why there's a sign on the highway as you enter Pemberton. So before we get into an interview with Roxy, I'm going to show a short video clip from the 1957 Pemberton Valley movie, and it stars Lukey and Doris Van Beem, Robert Kay, and Noreen Shire. We get to watch them planting potatoes with a little unit that we still have here at the museum. You can see it next to the general store.
It'll take Lukey and Doris and Noreen Shires and Robert Kay 5 or 6 days to finish planting. They ride to the field as if out for a picnic, but planting is no picnic. By the end of the week, they will have put 30 acres under cultivation. These people take potatoes seriously. Their children grow up knowing every kind and variety there is, spuds with poetic names like White Rose, Netted Gems, Epicure, Early Rose, and Green Mountain. They take great pride in the fact that a Pemberton potato has won a world championship 2 different years. They study the catalogs for pictures of new equipment. The potato is king in Pemberton, and if the prices are bad, as they have been this year, the farmer mutters darkly about turning to some other crop. But most of them never will. One of the great advantages of the farmer's life, people tell us, is that he can work outdoors, and how pleasant and healthy that can be. For the Van Beems and their neighbors, it often is. But planting requires too much concentration for them even to be aware of the beauties of nature. Each one of them is tremendously intent on his own job, the women in their cutting, Lukey in feeding the pieces, and Robert in driving slowly and absolutely straight. Planting is hard work. And after a few hours, it seems as if they've been doing it all their lives.
Roxy, why is Pemberton such a good place for seed potato production?
Well, as everyone knows, it's an isolated valley surrounded by mountains on all sides, so prohibits or at least slows down any pests that might affect the potato crop. Don't have potato fields that have contaminated with virus right next door that insects can transfer. We have seasons, which when we hit that freezing spell in the winter, it helps kill any volunteers that are left in the field. It helps kill any disease that might be left in the field. And the soils are, for the most part, sandy and dry, and the potatoes seem to like those sandy soils. Gives them room to grow bigger.
And Pemberton's a drier climate than the lower mainland too, right?
Yes, yes. You will often hear that the Fraser Valley's got, huge rainfall events happening, and we hardly get anything at the same time as that happens, which is good for us.
Is that why you see a lot of farms irrigating crops through the summer?
Yes. It's only been the last couple of years that we've had such dry summers. When we first started growing potatoes, we would irrigate maybe a week or two in August when it got really hot and dry. The last few years it's been getting hot and dry earlier, so we've had to start irrigating earlier and more frequently.
How many farms produce seed potatoes today?
Today, I believe there are 8 seed-producing farms in the valley.
And how many acres then would be under production?
There's about 600 to 700 acres. Just depends on the year and how the market is, how much is grown.
Yeah. And then a lot of seed growers also will lease land too, right?
Yeah, a lot. I would say almost all of the seed growers in the valley lease land besides which they own, because as seed growers have dropped off from growing seed for whatever reason, other people have picked up those varieties and acres and gone into rental property.
Are there varieties that are unique to Pemberton?
There are some varieties that only the organic growers grow, like the French fingerling, Desiree. There's a few that are not big production potatoes, and they don't sell them for seed particularly. They mostly sell them for food.
Okay. So the other varieties were, I guess those European varieties then that came to Canada?
So the varieties that were in this presentation, the only 2 that are left is the white rose and the netted gem. And the name of the netted gem has been changed to russet Burbank. It's still the same potato, but it has a different name. Yeah, the Green Mountain and those ones are not grown anymore. But we have a lot of other varieties that are grown, and that's determined by the market. Our people that we sell to will ask us to grow a certain variety, and we'll try and bring it on.
So what are some of those other varieties outside of netted gem and white rose?
So netted gem and white rose are kind of drifting away as well. There are not a lot of acres grown of those potatoes anymore. We have another russet called russet Narcota, which is, the farmers call it the pretty potato. That's the one you see in the grocery stores. It's very beautiful. Taste-wise, it doesn't compare to the russet Burbank. There's a lot of Yukon Gold and Chieftain. I think those are the big varieties. And then there's a bunch of others. There's red Lesotho, there's grow one called Cal White, which at one point was a huge variety, and now we're the only ones that grow it. There's some smaller varieties, like there's a red that was developed and proven in the test trials in the Fraser Valley. What's the name of that, Michelle?
AR-20 Canada.
Yeah, it's, Bex are growing that to see if it will go somewhere as a red variety. There's a few that people start and take for 3 or 4 years, and then there's no market, or it develops into a great market. Like the russet Narcoda came in, they replaced a variety called Norgold Russet. It has a shorter season. It's a nice potato. Some of the russets get really rough looking, and then Norgold doesn't seem to do that as much.
The pretty potato.
The pretty potato.
Where do seed potatoes go after they leave Pemberton? Often I see the trucks rolling through and the potatoes are rolling out of them along the road. And where do all those trucks go?
They go to a lot of different places in North America. On our farm, most of them go to California. Other farms that go to Idaho, Oregon, Washington is a big buyer. Some go to the Fraser Valley. Really small lots will go to organic growers around the province, 40, 50 pounds here and there. We sell a few into Alberta. We've actually shipped potatoes out to New Brunswick in the past. Hasn't been a regular thing, but sometimes they go a long ways.
And how often are potatoes shipped? Are they shipped in the spring and fall, or just in the fall?
They're shipped in the spring and the fall. Some of the growers in California, they will plant in December.
Right.
So certain varieties will go out in the fall, like November or December. But the bulk of them go in the spring, usually starting March and going until everybody's finished planting, which can be the end of June some years.
Now I know at the museum here we've got information about the cooperative, and that the animal barn, what is the animal barn today, was the potato warehouse. Because there was criteria the farmers had to meet in terms of storage of the potatoes before they were allowed to ship them through the co-op. Is that the same today, and what are the special considerations for preparation and storage of seed potatoes?
Well, we all have insulated storage. We have air ducts that blow air through to keep them cool, keep them from sprouting, keep them from breaking down if there happens to be any late blight or something like that in the potatoes. We don't have the big fancy storages that they would have in warmer climates, where they have just huge air flumes blowing air around the whole pile all the time. The main thing is, when we ship them, the buyers don't want them to be sprouting. So if they're peeping a little bit, they don't really want that. If it's getting late in the season, they will take it, but they really prefer them to be not sprouting yet.
And in your time, how have methods and equipment changed over the years? I know we saw the old potato planter there from '57, but I imagine there's been a lot of changes just in the last 25 years.
When we started growing potatoes in 1985, we were still cutting potatoes on the back of the planter.
Wow.
A little bit more modern than that. There would be 4 people cutting and 2 wheels going around to drop the potatoes.
Double production.
Yeah. It would take us 3 weeks to plant 15 acres. Now most of the farmers have the automatic planters, the seeds pre-cut at the root house and then dumped in. There's a couple different kinds. There's a cup planter or there's a picker planter. And a lot of us are planting up to 4 rows at a time now instead of 2. But we do still use those, we call them tuber unit planters, for our early generation seed. Because it allows you to have a little more control on any disease that there might be in the potatoes. Because you plant them in a cluster of 4 or 6. So if there's a problem with that potato, it's easier to pick out 4 or 6 diseased potatoes than if you plant them all haphazardly. So for our early generation seed, that's how we do it. So still using some of the old technology.
And when you say automatic, is there a computer on board now?
Oh, no.
Planter?
Not that, not that much.
There's not GPS steering the tractor?
There are in other places, but not in Pemberton.
Now, we also, at the museum here, have a potato sorting table that came from Miller Farm. As I understand it, was the first one with lights in the valley, so it meant all the Miller kids worked 24/7 then once they had lights. But what are some of the new methods for harvesting potatoes now?
We have bigger equipment. Instead of harvesting 1 row at a time and going behind and picking up with buckets, now we have, most everyone has a 2-row harvester, which will pick up 2 rows. But then in addition, they have what's called a windrower, which is usually 2 rows, which picks up 2 rows and dumps it into the 2 rows that the harvester's picking up. So they can pick up 4 or 6 rows with 1 pass with the harvester. So it speeds up the harvesting enormously.
How long would it take you with today's equipment to harvest 15 acres?
Day? Yeah.
And is there still a gang on the machine sorting as?
Most of the new harvest, none of them are new, they're always new to us. Most of them do not, or they will have 1 person. Most of the sorting is done at the storage. Take out the dirt and the sticks and any rotten worms and rocks and that kind of thing.
The odd mouse.
Yeah, frogs, toads.
Can you tell us about how the potato inspection process works? I understand there's a potato inspector comes
Yes.
through Pemberton.
So because it's a certified seed potato industry, the seed potato growers have to have their seed inspected and certified by Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So what happens is, once you've planted your seed, you have to make an application to CFIA for inspection. You have to show them on a map where they're planted and what varieties, and then there's a charge for that. And the CFIA will come up. Each different variety will be inspected twice in a year. But, you know, like on our farm we have 7 different varieties, so they may be there 5 or 6 or 7 different times, because they're planted at different stages, or you know, plant one this week and a different variety next week, so they're at different stages of growth. So the inspector has to inspect them the first time, I think, is 6 weeks after planting, and then they do another one just before harvest.
Do they inspect every plant, or is it more of a random sample?
It's more random. They walk through the fields. they're well trained, so they can spot something that's out of the ordinary. We also have a girl that we hired to walk the fields and check for diseased plants and insects. She helps us, lets us know, if they're, for example, the flea beetle populations are building, then we need to get out and spray those. Aphids are a really big concern for seed potatoes because they carry some of the serious potato diseases. So if there's aphids in the field, she'll let us know and we'll go and spray for that.
Can you tell us how the labs work and how that work gets done by the seed growers? What is the lab work all about?
So you heard a little bit about the virus freeing of the potatoes and the stem cuttings that they used to do. They would take a virus-free potato, grow it, let the sprouts grow until the leaves were, a couple inches high, cut those and plant them in wet sand. The lab came about in 1988 or 89 when someone came up with the idea of doing potatoes in tissue culture in sterile medium. So in order to do that, you have to have what's called a laminar airflow bench, which blows clean filtered air at the person cutting potatoes. The potatoes are started, just allowed to sprout in the lab. I guess I'm supposed to call it a propagation facility. It's not a lab, really. They're allowed to sprout. The sprouts are disinfected with alcohol and bleach, and then they're put into test tubes, and then they grow a plant, usually about 4 inches tall. And this is what we use to multiply up our seed. So those plants started from sprouts are tested before anyone can cut any to plant in their fields. And everywhere there's a leaf on that stem, you can start a new plant. So usually there's 5 to 8 pieces of stem that you can cut and put into fresh sterile medium. So that will be started like now. If there's any new varieties or someone wants to get a different line on their potatoes, they'll be sprouted now and grown, because not all of those sprouts will grow. Some of them will get moldy or whatever, right? So you do quite a bunch of them until you get one that's nice and clean. And then it's sent for testing. They do all the virus testing for all the viruses. If it comes back clean, then you can start multiplying it up. And so for every acre that you want to have 3 years down the road, you need 100 plants. So if I want to grow 5 acres, I need 500 plants going into the field in the spring. So we spend a lot of time sitting in this laminar airflow bench cutting stems, sticking them in agar.
And I understand it's a team effort between...
The way it works is we got a grant for technology transfer to train us how to do this tissue culture. And then the growers got together, everybody chipped in money to build a building that would house the facility. It originally was on school board property where the old outdoor school residence used to be. And that property got sold, so we lost our building. We had to put in another one, which is a little bit bigger, and it's on the Ronan farm now. So it's owned by the growers. They built it, they maintain it. We all contribute so much per acre that we grow towards the maintenance of the facility. And there are 4 growers that volunteer to maintain the stock over the year when everyone else has kind of done their multiplication. And it changes.
So it runs year round?
Not certainly year round.
There's just no rest for a potato farmer?
That's right.
Thought maybe you'd get January off. Now, we heard how Agriculture Canada, advised farmers at that 1922 fair that this might be a good industry to get into. Today, what role does Agriculture Canada play in the seed potato industry in Pemberton?
Mainly inspection.
Red tape.
Red tape, yeah, lots of it. Unofficially, they're very helpful with other things, cutting through the red tape sometimes. When you ship to the US, it sometimes can be onerous. Some countries demand certain types of tests be done before you can ship into the
Like
country.
Europe or...
Yeah, and the US as well. There's a test called a potato cyst nematode test that we have to do. So CFIA collects the samples and does the testing. We pay for it. But they negotiate on our behalf with our trading partners, and they, make sure that we have the right paperwork when we do ship potatoes across the line.
So they don't get hung up
Yeah.
at the border.
Yeah.
And then I see too that there's a BC Seed Potato Association. I was always aware there was a Pemberton Seed Potato Association, but I guess the Pemberton seed growers are tied in with the BC seed growers?
Yeah, Pemberton is part of the BC Seed Growers Association. The role of the BC Seed Growers Association is largely marketing. They put together, we have a seed book, which is like a catalog. They've put together now a website. People can go and see what varieties and who's growing them and contact information, that kind of thing. They also bring in speakers to inform us of any changes in regulations or techniques or whatever.
Okay. And what are the other seed producing areas in BC?
Well, it's primarily Pemberton and the Fraser Valley now.
Okay.
It used to be Okanagan and up north,
The Peace?
Caribou. But Pemberton and Fraser Valley now, primarily.
Now, back in the year 2008, you may not know this, it was the International Year of the Potato. And that was a designation by the United Nations and the World Health Organization. And it was about affirming the need to focus world attention on the role that the potato can play in providing food security and eradicating poverty. Would you say this is still the case for the humble potato?
I think the humble potato now has competition with pasta and rice and quinoa, different kinds of carbohydrate sources. But it's still pretty steady, hasn't dropped too much. I think, I forget the numbers, something like 60% of people eat potatoes on a regular basis.
Worldwide?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also read that, I guess the reason it was a focus for the UN is potatoes as a crop require the least amount of water compared to corn and rice and wheat, with water being an issue. And I guess Pemberton conditions would prove that. It's pretty
Yes.
dry this summer.
Yes.
What are the major risks to the seed potato industry in Pemberton?
Gentrification.
Like the potato famine where everyone's growing the same crop?
No, it's more the land is being bought up by people who do not farm and do not intend to farm. And largely don't want to rent it to potato farmers. Everyone is organic, which for a lot of people means doing basically nothing with their land, cutting the hay. Yeah, some years you can get good money for hay, but last year hay was abundant and there was no money in it. So that's the biggest challenge for potato farmers, is finding enough land to grow their crop on.
And tell us how the crop rotation works with potatoes.
So in this seed potato act, seed control act, you're required to have a minimum of 2 years in between potato crops. So
On
you plant-
land.
On a given piece of land, you can plant potatoes, and then 2 years of something else, and then potatoes again. A lot of the farmers in the valley are on like a 5 or 6 year rotation, just because the rotation helps to control volunteers, so you don't get as much problem with varietal mixes, and it also helps control disease and insects, because it's a different crop coming up, so it's not the same crop year after year after year.
Are volunteers last year's potato left in the soil? Is that-
Yeah, volunteers happen when you lose potatoes off the harvester, and you always lose potatoes off the
Yes, I've
harvester.
seen them rolling down the meadows, right?
Yeah, and depending on the type of soil, they'll freeze, but if they're buried and they're in a certain type of soil, they will grow again.
Or it's a warm winter.
Yeah.
Now here's the question I know we've all been wanting to ask. What is your favorite potato?
Hens. I love the red Lesotho for hash browns and fresh out of the garden or fresh out of the field. We generally eat a lot of Yukon Gold. I think the russet Burbank is still my favorite for French fries and baking, and it's very versatile.
It's your all-around potato.
Yeah.
What about the pretty potato? Is it good for anything? Other than what everybody?
We don't eat it much.
And if residents in Pemberton want to get their hands on Pemberton potato plants, how do they do that?
Don't actually sell plants.
Or
If you,
the seed?
yeah, if you want to grow them in your garden, the Pemberton Women's Institute has has seed potatoes for sale in the beginning of May. The seed potato growers donate potatoes to that sale. And then throughout the year, the Pemberton Valley Nursery usually has seed potatoes from farmers in the valley. Or you can go directly to the farm, you know, if you want to put in 100 pounds or something.
Now, when we were talking before today, you talked to me about the multiplier effect and pre-elite, elite 1, and elite 2. I'm still a little bit confused, and I did have trouble in math. So can you walk me through that again?
Okay, so we talked about the propagation facility. The plants that come out of that and go into the field are called nuclear stock. They're planted as nuclear stock. When they're harvested, they're called pre-elite. And then the pre-elite is planted, and when it's harvested, it's called elite 1. Then the elite 1 is planted. We don't sell much elite 1. And it's harvested as elite 2. Elite 2 is the main seed crop that we sell out of Pemberton. And every time you plant those potatoes back, there's at least a 10 times multiplier effect. For some varieties, it could be up as high as 20. It's just how many potatoes this particular plant will produce.
So the average yield on 1 acre for Elite 2 then?
Average maybe 12 ton, 12, 14 ton. Just depends on the variety.
You see how 1 acre can feed 10 people? That's a lot of french fries.
Yeah.
And then you've mentioned too that biosecurity of the crop is always a concern. So what do you mean by biosecurity?
Well, if someone has traveled in a farming area and being in a field that maybe has, say, nematodes, and they've got dirt on their shoes, and then they come into Pemberton and walk into a field and drop that dirt, they could potentially be contaminating with something that we don't have here. So it is kind of a concern with all of the tourist influx that we've had in the past years. Most people don't go into the potato farms, but they are going into, you know, the commercial mixed veg farms like North Arm Farm or so that's always a concern. And the other concern is people bringing in potatoes, buying potatoes in the grocery store and planting them in the gardens. That's why the sign is at the entrance to Pemberton. That's why we want people to plant Pemberton potatoes. Sure, you can't always get the variety that you might want or that you know from elsewhere, but it's just too big a risk to the industry to bring in something from outside.
Well, those are all the questions I have, so we'll turn it over to you guys. Do you have any questions for Roxy about potato farming? You can pick one.
Val.
Well, my question is, do you have special nursery acres for your potatoes when they're coming from the plant to the number 1 stage, number 2 stage, and elite 2, 1, 2? Do you have a special area for these potatoes? And then when you are ready to plant your 50, whatever acreage it is that the crop you use every year? Again, and then the next one comes up. Is there a constant turnover of potatoes that have been grown from the plant to the one that are being sold as seed potatoes?
Yes.
Am I making does this make sense?
Yeah. So as far as a nursery, some people do actually have their plants that come from the lab in one field.
Okay.
All of the different varieties.
Yeah.
Once they are into the pre-elite stage, usually it's planted in the same field, so it would be pre-elite, elite 1, side by side, with a gap in between. It's called a flow-through system, which is why we're in the lab every year. So we start new plants every winter, and then the elite 2 is shipped out. So we're not planting back the elite 2. We could plant it back 1 or 2 more years and get elite 4, but that's as far as we're allowed to go in Pemberton, is to elite 4. The elite trait, I think, goes down to 6 or 8, and then it's commercial. But in Pemberton, in order to keep it disease-free, we've said 4 is enough.
And where do you get your new plant cuttings from? Like the ones that you're planting again in the following year?
We maintain plants in the propagation facility over the year, or we bring in potatoes from the field and start sprouts and start them fresh. Or if we're bringing in a new variety, there's a lab in Vancouver Island that does the heat treatment to take the viruses out, so he will treat them test them, make sure they're clean, and then they come in tissue culture plants.
Okay,
They don't bring in actual potatoes, just plants.
just the seeds themselves.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Very basic. I buy the russet potatoes from HE store.
Yeah.
Which ones are they? The pretty ones?
Yes.
Well, where do you get the other ones then that you like? Anybody sells them anywhere?
There is one farmer that grows them, but I don't think he sells it into
Oh.
the grocery stores.
Just
It's not
tell
as
us where the
common.
field is.
Top secret.
Yeah, Jan?
When you did the soil survey back in the day, and as you've already mentioned, our environment contributes a lot too, but you must, or did it make any difference in what varieties that began to be grown here? Because varieties sometimes suit certain soils, don't they? And-
I'm not sure that my survey influenced that really. It's mostly influenced by the market.
Okay.
And then the farmers learn what potatoes grow best in what soils, and everyone has, a mix of soils on their farm. So, for example, the Cal White likes really sandy, gravelly soil. Other ones would die in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have to get rid of all the foliage before the harvester starts? And if so, how do you manage that?
It's way easier to harvest if you do. We use a top kill, which just dehydrates the tops, doesn't go into the potatoes. It's just like, it's a desiccant, really, just kills the tops. If you don't, then the vines wrap up in the end and it causes a real problem. And plus, if you don't top kill the potatoes well enough, when you're harvesting, the skins will peel off. And that's a place where disease can get into the potato. So you want to kill the tops and let that skin set so that it's tough enough that it's not going to peel off when you're harvesting. Yeah.
Prince Edward Island potatoes, they grow seed there as well, do they not?
Yes.
And I don't know what percentage or, compared to BC, are they way more or? is
Yeah,
it
way more.
Way more.
Yeah.
The whole island.
And they ship to Europe or someplace too, don't they?
Oh, they ship all over the place.
But
Mexico, North Africa.
Aren't some Pemberton potatoes shipped overseas as well? Or mostly in North America?
Well, we have shipped to New Brunswick, and those potatoes have gone to North Africa.
Oh,
Yeah, if they don't have enough of their own, they'll source them from here.
But not even Prince Edward Island has a virus-free program like Pemberton. So PEI has had issues.
Yes.
yeah, I thought I heard something about that.
A toll bridge.
Told death that it was since that bridge went in.
Any other questions?
When you're not growing the potatoes, you have cattle on there mostly?
In between potatoes, we have hay and pasture, mostly. We have a small patch of carrots that will grow in after the potatoes or before the potatoes.
No strawberries anymore?
No. No,
That's too bad.
just not enough of us around to do that. Yes.
So how many acres to cycle all of this? To say you're planting 15 acres of potatoes. So you need 15 times 4.
No. So your pre-elite would be like a tenth of your E2s, or 100th really, and then your E1s would be a tenth, and then
The yield gets higher each phase of the plantation.
yeah, if you plant a plant and you get 10 potatoes, So you can cut those potatoes into 4 pieces, and then so you plant 40 potatoes. And then that goes on again until, so it really multiplies up quickly.
How many acres?
Well, I think the average farm in Pemberton right now is probably about 60 acres. And I calculated this year, I think we planted 6 acres of seed, our own seed.
Yeah.
So,
And how much lease land?
half of our farm is leased. It's about 300 acres we lease.
It seems like we need legislation to stop this gentrification taking over major tracts of land and refusing to allow it to be farmed, like some kind of legislation. Okay, if you do that, you've still got to allow a certain percentage to be farmed, otherwise we're going to lose the industry.
We've been trying to say that for years, but nobody really wants to do it.
No, we're all in a free country,
Yeah.
free to starve to death.
Well, I guess we want to eat food from China. Even China's, they're developing their farmlands as well. California is developing their farmlands. They're having.
What they did was drought.
Yeah, they lost a lot to drought and development. So we can't rely on other countries to feed us.
I hope this inspires everyone to go home and cook up some potatoes.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a little bit of sunshine. No more meal planning. Potatoes.
But I really, really miss a new potato like we used to grow. That you went and harvested these tiny potatoes and they were so sweet and they were so lovely.
Yeah.
And even when I buy the little potatoes in the store here from Pemberton, they're not the same.
No,
Is that because I didn't grow them myself?
I got some.
they're not as fresh.
No.
It's,
Nothing like going out and pulling a plant clear in the car.
that's right. That's the best.
Not to forget the butter.
I really want to thank Roxy for taking time out of a very busy schedule to be here today. We really appreciate it, Roxy.
Thank you.